All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 21st episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And for this episode, it is my privilege and honor and joy to welcome as my very special guest, Andy Smith. Hello, Andy. How are you?
Hello, I'm so excited to be here. I got my Philip Chase outfit on to make sure that I fit in with Dear Dr. Fantasy. So happy to be here.
You even got the glasses. So, yeah,
Yes, I
nice.
do. I told
Nice.
Philip before to pull back the car. I told him I actually don't need these. These are like the blue light, like if I'm working late at night, but these are not for vision. So I'm a little faking it, but hey,
But they look good nevertheless. So,
that's right. That's right. It makes
yeah.
me look very scholarly.
Yes, yes. Not that you need to look scholarly because, as I think everyone who knows you realizes, you're a very well-read and articulate person. So I'm excited to talk to you today about some of the books that we have in common, some that you've read that I haven't, and what you've been up to as well, because you did have some time off from BookTube, sort of, I guess, right? Lots going on in your life, including. So I actually forgot to ask you ahead of time, but I know that you have the movie theater and the bookstore and all that going on. And I mean, most people would be super busy just with that.
Yeah.
But you also have been busy running for office, which is awesome. I think it's great because I'm pretty sure you're running on your principles, which is pretty cool. I think that's a great thing to see in politics these days, that somebody's actually running on their principles. So, yeah, how's all that been? How's life been treating you?
Woo, yeah, it's a lot, but I kind of like that feeling of doing a lot of stuff. And my weakness is kind of always I want to, if I feel strongly about something, I want to do it. And so that's what the movie theater came about. I feel very strongly about cinema and that it can really help grow a community. And so we did that. Obviously, I feel very strongly about books, love that.
Yeah.
So we started that bookstore when that opportunity became available. And then actually, especially, I think something you would understand. I've been interested in politics a long time, but speaking of the power of books, when I finished Malazan Book of the Fallen, that final book is such a, I think, call to better the world through feeling other people's feelings and
Yeah.
not to necessarily destroy your enemy, but in some ways to win your enemy to a better world. And
Hmm.
that coincided with an opportunity that came up to run for office. And so, yeah, I jumped into that stream as well. So that definitely caused a lot of, reshuffling in my life. So the movie theater actually we're structuring away from a for profit into a nonprofit community 501c3. So
Wow.
I have a board there now, and we're starting to move away from like me having total creative control, which is great. That was sort of the ultimate goal. We just kind of brought that forward a little bit. Uh,
Nice. Wow.
yeah. So, and then bookstores, we opened our second bookstore in July.
Oh,
So,
no kidding.
uh,
Wow. Okay. Huh.
we
In a
found,
different town, or is it?
yeah. So this is another thing we weren't looking for, but we found an old Carnegie library that was for sale, the entire building, built in 1907 in this little town
Wow.
called Zumbrota, Minnesota. It's a very small Midwest town with like, the one main street that's right by the river. It's beautiful. There's an old, like, historic covered bridge. It's a beautiful town.
Sounds
And there's
lovely.
a library that no one was buying. And so we picked it up and we turned it back into a palace for books. And so it has two floors, like a basement and then like a top floor. The top floor is our um, bookstore. We call it the Zumbrota Literary Society because that was the name of the society that petitioned the Carnegie Foundation to give them a library. So we kind of
Wow.
went back to the original name. This is like, 1907 was still back where this was primarily sort of prairie and the wilderness, so to speak. And so they didn't have a lot of books, and so they pulled together this Zumbrota Literary Society where everyone, would share books or they would pool their money to buy new books. And eventually that turned into the Carnegie Librarians in Broda, which now we own. So that's a used bookstore there. And then in the basement, actually, and this is something we don't really know anything about, there was a pottery studio that was operating. And
Whoa.
so when we when we bought the building, we actually acquired the pottery business as well. And so we've been learning about that. So
That's
yeah,
incredible. So wait, you're gonna
it's a
keep the
quirky thing that happened, but it's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. I just think that's so wonderful. It sounds like such a lovely location, and you're going to keep the pottery business going, I guess. That's the goal.
Yes, we've been blessed that. So the way it works is there's a little like gift shop, but the primary thing is it's actually a studio where like artists have their like membership fees, and then they have keys and they're able to come in and work on their uh art whenever they want. There's a kiln there, and we've been lucky that a couple of those artists also double as like they have in lieu of membership fees, they do jobs around the studio. So like one of them is our kiln master, so he knows all about
Wow.
you know, how to do that, how long they need it to dry, and keeps track of that. We have another person who's in charge of all of our like actual physical clay and ordering that, making sure we're getting good quality stuff. Anyway, I don't know if he will get into Dr. Fantasy to learn about pottery, but we have some people doing that, which is great. We're learning about it. It's a very new thing, but it's really great. So I'm hoping, right now I'm a little too busy, but I'm hoping next summer after the legislative session and I need some like downtime, I'm gonna hopefully get into pottery because it's a really great sort of tactile thing once you start
Wow.
getting on the wheel.
That is so awesome. It does strike me, though, that a lot of what you're doing is about engaging with great stories. So you have the theater where you're a fan of you're a student of film, and I think that
Mhm.
part of the motivation is to, in addition to have a place where the community can gather and that sort of thing, over great stories, you want to celebrate some great films too. You've got your
Mhm.
bookstores. You've got, which is very obviously about great stories.
Right.
You've got your YouTube channel, and even I think the move to see what you can do in politics is you're engaging with people's stories there too, aren't you? In a way that you spoke about the what you learned from the crippled god from the Malazan Book of the Fallen, about empathy and compassion, and it really is about hearing and understanding other people's stories, isn't it?
Yeah, so much a part of that. Sorry, ambulance is going by.
Oh, I can't
Um,
hear it. Yeah.
oh, great. Okay, never mind. It's not. Um, there you go. This mic's doing a great job. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I am captivated by story. I am completely driven by that. Even I didn't do it on purpose, but pottery, as you know, like that was the original books, right? When paper was too expensive to make,
Yeah.
they told stories in ceramics, right? In Greece, in Mesopotamia,
Yep.
uh in your neck of the woods in the northern European nations. I mean that's how they told stories. And so
Yeah.
there so much of humanity is about stories. And I think I'm kind of known as the kind of the postmodern guy. I think that's so interesting because everyone has their own story, right?
Mm.
And that's what drives them. And it's such an interesting facet of humanity and sort of our level of intelligence that we've evolved to, that we are driven so much by the stories we think we are in. And to combat wrong stories, I mean, I would say authoritarianism is a story
Yep.
that
The
you
narrative.
have to
Yep.
battle. And it's a narrative that people put themselves in, that we need to follow somebody. Honestly, the chosen one trope is kind of authoritarianism, taken to its extreme. So
Yep.
anyway, all that to say is there's a lot to say there, but yeah, I absolutely love story, and it's an incredibly powerful force. I read a paper a little while ago that said that for it was examining the 2020 racial justice movements and talking about what does it take in a society to cause movements or to cause something that feels big. And they found through their research, I'm forgetting the specifics, but that 3% of a community or 3% of a like population, if they get involved in something, it feels like a mass movement.
Wow.
Um, because we're such storytellers that when we hear such a story being told by even like a minority of people, if it's unified, we feel that it's everywhere, which I think is so cool and just an interesting part about who humans are. And it's
Yeah.
why art's important.
Wow, that's actually a very valuable fact. I also love that you pointed out that pottery is very much an old form of storytelling too, much like stained glass windows in medieval Europe. You're in images because most people didn't read. You're reminding people of these stories, which
Yep.
were common. They were communal property. These stories that people,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's the Bible of the layman is what I think Martin Luther called art, the Bible of the layman.
yeah,
Um, because even if they could read, it was the highest of nobles, and they couldn't read in their own tongues. So you're reading in
Latin,
probably Latin,
yeah, yeah.
um, which it's not the same when you're reading in a second language in your own language. So which was illegal at the time.
Yeah, for the Bible to be translated into another
Yep.
language. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Until the Protestant Reformation, essentially. Yeah.
that's right.
Well, that's awesome. And well, speaking of stories, I think it is a good segue here for us to ask you the standard question that we have here on Dear Dr. Fantasy, which is, what are some of the most important stories in your life which have been formative for who you are? How would you explain Andy Smith through stories, going on the principle that you are what you read to some degree or other, I suppose. But yeah, what are some of the big ones for you? And you can start as early as you want with little Andy, and going up to today, maybe why you started a BookTube channel and all of that. So
Yeah. Well, I definitely think it's important for young kids to read as early as possible, and not in a like you need to read because that'll make you smart kind of way, but to really garner a love of reading. And you've talked about this with your daughters,
yeah.
that this thing is so important. So when I first think of that question, honestly, the first thing I think of is the Berenstain Bears. Do you know those
Mm.
books? We
Oh
had
yeah, I do.
just stacks of them, and I just loved them. I would go, one after the other and read them over and over and over again. And they're simple stories, but they're fun, they're imaginative, and that kind of got me. That's just like the first like reading experience I remember is that, and I don't
I
remember specifics or
definitely.
anything.
I was just gonna say I definitely identify with Papa Bear.
Yes, I can see that. I can see
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that's the first thing I remember is those books. And then kind of the next step are two big ones for me around fourth and fifth grade. One was Fellowship of the Ring. I read it way too early.
Uh-huh.
And I read it before The Hobbit. I don't know why, but I think that must have been when the movie was coming out. And my dad had it, and I was like, "Can I read this?" And he's like, "I mean, there's nothing objectionable. You might not like it, but yeah, sure, go for it." And so I read it, and I didn't get much of it. But I remember the feeling of it, the feeling of this epic other world, this adventure, this fight against evil, uniting all these different people. And it was just like a completely different use of imagination than I had ever had.
Yeah.
So I remember that feeling. I know for sure that I did not like soak in the story, but feelings are important. The second thing actually is I don't know if you remember these. Your daughters might have read them. The Dear America books. There's a series of books that came out that were in journal or epistolary form for kids
Yeah.
about America's past. And it
Yeah.
purposefully focused on either marginalized communities or sort of on the ground. Like it wasn't like presidents or politicians. It was one I remember very specifically was a boy who grew up on a ranch in the Midwest. One
Mm-hmm.
was um, a young Chinese. They're mostly boys because I was a boy, so I would read the boy one.
Mm-hmm.
It was the 90s. There's a lot of gender, stick to your status quo kind of thing. Anyway, who's working on the railroad, the Trans Pacific Railroad.
Yeah.
And for me, looking back on that, that was such a formative idea of what I just said. Like stories are for everyone, not just like the knights and the whatever. And those two stories both sort of focus on that, right? The smallest person can change the course of the future, as Galadriel says. So you
Yeah.
got Frodo, who's not an important person, but his courage sort of brings him to prominence and to do what is good. And then in the real world, right? Someone who's just trying to have the American dream while they're dealing with whether it's racism or whether it's class struggle or whether it's just the fact of being in a new nation. So those two really, I think, were solid building blocks. And then also, I grew up very religious, so the Bible is definitely. I mean, I read that every day growing up, so I have to mention that. My view of what the Bible is has changed a lot since then. I grew up in a very conservative household, but that's very, very important to me. And obviously, as a lot of people know who followed me, that was what I thought I was going to do for my vocation, was be a biblical scholar and a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And not doing that, but that was a big part of my life for sure. And I still think a lot of those values that I learned there um, obviously changed who I was. So that's another big one. And then recently, have to mention Malazan Book of the Fallen, of course. And then spiritually, also The Color Purple by Alice Walker.
Mm.
It's an immensely formative, more recent read for me about the beauty of the world and this sort of spiritual otherness that we can find all around us if we're looking for that beauty and hope even in the midst of very difficult circumstances. So
Wow.
uh yeah, there we go. I think that's good for now. I could talk about books forever.
That's good though. That's why we're here essentially, is
Yeah,
to talk about books. But going back to, of course, I want to talk more about Malazan with you. In
yeah,
fact, it's kind of funny because I'm pretty confident the first chat that I was ever involved in, the first collaboration that I was ever involved in, was our Malazan collaboration. You
yeah,
and me and Alan and Iskar Jarek. That
yep.
was, I think, and it might have been the first for you as well. I don't know for
Yeah,
sure.
I remember technically we didn't know what we were doing. We're like, do we all record our screens or like how do we
Yeah.
do this?
Yeah.
And we made it way more complicated than we need to. Because I think that was that was before even everyone knew like how easy Zoom was because it was early on in the pandemic. But yeah, I remember
Yeah.
that. That was great.
Yeah. So that was the first for both of us. And it also opened my eyes to just how awesome collaborations are. And that's kind of my bread and butter, really, is I love the chats. I love the collaborations. I do love doing reviews and that sort of thing too. But for me, there's a special magic in talking with someone else and seeing what comes out of that, because there's an element there where you and I talk about a book together and you make me think of things I hadn't thought of before, and then the discussion goes in that direction. That doesn't happen when I'm just doing a review by myself. I know what I'm going to say pretty much. I don't usually surprise myself when I start talking and recording, but in a discussion there's a special dynamic. And so that collaboration that we had really just sort of said to me, this platform is going to be a place where I'm going to talk to people. So it's a very special memory for me, actually. But yeah, Malazan is something that.
Wait,
What's that?
that I'm glad. Like I definitely feel the same way,
Yeah.
and that goes back to like when our story squishes against someone else's story, it changes it for the better, which I think is so great.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of this platform, where we're all together and we're talking about these books and these stories, and suddenly seeing them in a different way that we hadn't seen before. I mean, I experience this in the classroom all the time, but I think there's one special difference here, among others, which is everybody who's here on BookTube is here because we're extremely passionate about it. And I do have students too. Like, don't get me wrong. I have usually, maybe 3, 5 students in a class who are really into what we're talking about. And the others are there because they have to get these courses done in order to get their degree, and they will do what they need to do. But here we're all crazy, right? We love what we're
Yep.
doing.
You don't have to dangle 3 credits in front of me. I am here
Yeah,
for free.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Philip, has anyone turned the question around on you and asked what books were formative for you? I'm curious if you've ever answered.
I don't think so. I think no one has ever done that to me before. So
All right. Well, Philip, so what are some for you haven't prepared, so I won't hold you to this, but what are some books that come up right away for you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, spontaneity is good on this one, I think. Well, it's interesting because, like you, I did grow up in a religious household. In fact, my father was, for his career, a pastor. And so,
Mine too.
yeah, I know you're a PK as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're two PKs here, wearing our jackets and our glasses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
We didn't
and my,
fall too far. Three.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think being a professor was kind of like something I fell into that felt natural because, and for a long time, I as well thought maybe about being a pastor. So, but I didn't go to seminary like you. I figured out that I probably wouldn't be a very good pastor. Probably around my first or second year of college. And so, yeah, the plan changed at that point where I didn't have a plan actually. But I figured out I don't think I can do this. But like you, I mean, I read the Bible was a very formative, um, uh, you know, series of books. Really, it's a bunch of books, put together. Um, and I read it a lot. I read it every day, like you, and engaged with it. And my understanding of it also evolved over the years. So it's certainly something that was very formative and important for me and will always be so. And there are many parts of it that I admire deeply. And again, like you, I think my first fantasy read was actually Lloyd Alexander's The Chronicles of Prydain. But from there, it was Tolkien, and Tolkien was the one that just like, boom, wow, this this was a huge moment in my life reading Tolkien as a kid, because it really did set me on a lot of my life path, including,
Yeah.
I think eventually and sort of when I was a kid, I can remember very distinctly thinking to myself, this is what I want to do. I want to do what Tolkien did. I want to tell stories that give people a sense of beauty, that give people a sense that life has meaning, that um, move people and help them to feel connected with those around them. So,
Yeah. Can I ask, because obviously I was 10 years old in 2001 when Peter Jackson's first movie came out.
yeah.
So that it was in the air. And so that's kind of how I came to it. Like I said, my dad owned it, so I probably would have read it even without like eventually. But you know, that's why I came to it. I'm curious, what brought you to it? Was it a parent or a friend or library? What brought you to Tolkien? I mean,
My
you said Lloyd
father.
Alexander was kind of a pretty key cog in the reading process towards Tolkien, but I'm curious.
Yeah, it was definitely my father. He was a fantasy reader. So he's again a big reason why I ended up interested in fantasy. Probably the main reason, really. So yeah, it was really the books on my father's shelves, and it just got it. I got it from him, really. So yep, that's where I picked up Tolkien, and that's been a special kind of I think bond between us as well. The fantasy. Although interestingly, he tends not to read so much fantasy these days, primarily because for him, he doesn't want to read about suffering anymore. He doesn't want to read about all that pain, and he feels like there's enough of it in the real world. And I'm not in that place. Obviously, I read a lot of fantasy still, but I get that. I can respect that when people say, I just don't want to have to read about suffering when I think about it a lot already. But I think that is an important function of literature, actually, is to portray pain and suffering. Not that it has to do that, but he will read certain fantasy still, like Discworld. He loves Discworld,
Mhm.
which is also got some very important social critiques in it. Sir Terry Pratchett was a very perceptive person, so it's not that
I
it's
still
just.
have not
Oh, you haven't.
I still have not added Pratchett to my repertoire.
Ah,
Not for like any purposeful reason. It's just, one of those, you can't read everything. And so for the moment, I think I have a couple, like Mort is here. And I think the City Watch books, I have a couple of them. I kind of,
yeah.
whenever they come into the bookstore, I kind of grab them. So I'm like, I'm going to read those and love them. I know. I just haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, I predict you're gonna like Pratchett. First, actually, for his brilliant humor and his wordplay, but also I think one of the reasons that Alan loves Discworld is there is a social critique in there that is very much part of Alan's passion for these books. I think if you've heard him talk about Discworld before.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a kind of an everyman or every person component to Discworld that is, I think, very important to what Pratchett was about. There's definite social critique in there, and it's wonderfully embedded in this humor, in these humorous stories. But it's a very important part of them, I think. So, but yeah,
Talking of talking of reader journeys, so after Lord of the Rings, I finished. Fifth grade, I started, and then I came back in seventh grade when the second movie come out, and that's a big difference, fifth and seventh grade, at least for me, reading level. And so I came back, read the trilogy, and actually got it. And
aha,
then my uncle, who was very, very big into fantasy, still is, gifted me Eye of the World. That was the next. That was at Christmas. He gave that to me, and then of course, Wheel of Time will keep you busy for a long time, and actually at that point was not finished. I made it to, I think, book 11, Winter's Heart, and it wasn't, that was the end of it. And so
that was the
he had
last one that Jordan wrote, actually, right? Yeah.
yeah, and so I think they were in the process of figuring that out. He was sick but not dead yet. I can't remember the exactly, but I got to the end and was like, oh no. And then actually I didn't finish Wheel of Time until like 2017 because I wanted to kind of catch myself back up and wait till it was finished.
Uh-huh.
But what was the next step for you after Lord of the Rings? Because you didn't have Wheel of Time, I don't think, at that point, or at least not as many
Yeah.
as I did.
Yeah, no, I did read Wheel of Time eventually, but I was quite a bit older when I read it. I read it so that the timing was this. I read the last book in the series, book 14, right when it was published. So actually the timing worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah,
And I can't remember what it was, about a decade ago or more
yeah, I
even.
think it was like 2012. I think something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So that's when I was reading the series, was probably, in the, I don't know, somewhere around 2010 or so, and when I was already pretty old. um, and so, yeah, I can't say that Wheel of Time was formative for me, but it was at a time when I was sort of trying to branch out and read more fantasy and just discover, I was looking really to reproduce that Tolkien thing. I was
Yeah,
on a quest to try to have that experience again, because of course I reread all the Tolkien stuff again and again and again. But there's a point where I was like, I'd like to expand beyond Middle Earth here and to try some other great fantasy. So I read a bunch of things during that time, including,
Sword of Shannara stuff. Terry
yeah, I
Brooks.
I tried Terry Brooks' The Sword of Shannara, and immediately and I actually was pretty young when I did that. I was probably closer to, I might have even been a teenager actually when I read Sword of Shannara. So that was quite a while earlier. But I thought, okay, this is an imitation of Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings. So I didn't continue. And I'm told that actually he goes his own direction as the Shannara books
Yeah.
continue. So I'll have to revisit
Yeah,
those.
I did the same recently. I did the same thing. I read it, and Terry Brooks is actually a beautiful writer. The
Uh-huh.
prose is very beautiful in his works, but it does feel very like imitation y. So I'd be curious. I have a couple standalones that he's done outside of that world, and I kind of want to
Yeah,
give it a try again.
I do too. I actually have one of his books that I think is not a Shannara book,
Is
but
it Magic Kingdom for Sale? Is that the one that you have?
it might be actually. Yeah.
That might
Huh.
be a fun read along at some point. I mean, I have to wait till this election's over, but I'd be very curious. It's not, I think it's like 400 pages, so it's
Yeah, it's
fantasy
not a big
short.
book. Yeah. Cool. Oh, another one I forgot to mention that was an earlier one along with Tolkien, a little bit later, but one that I got into before I started to try to expand even more was Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea
Mhm.
books. Those I read earlier as well, and I would actually think after Tolkien, Ursula Le Guin was the most formative writer for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Because
would I?
Ursula K. Le Guin is very different from Tolkien. She's
Yes.
very
Oh yeah.
she has a beautiful world, but her storytelling, at least in that, to me, is more sort of C.S. Lewis-esque, very simple but elegant.
Yeah.
Obviously elevated for a different I think it's a different age range. Narnia is very much kind of parents can read it to children, but it
Yeah.
is very a simple storytelling with some beautiful craft, and that's kind of how I see Le Guin. At least I should say the Earthsea
Yeah,
stuff, because she
the
is
earthy stuff.
obviously
Yeah.
her sci-fi stuff is really heady, in a good
Yes,
way, but very much not the same style.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of Narnia, yeah, that's another one I read. I would say it was less, I enjoyed the Narnia books, but I wouldn't refer to it as quite so formative for me. I think I kind of saw what C.S. Lewis was doing with the pretty heavy allegory in it. And that didn't interest me as much as a completely new world like Middle Earth, or
Yeah.
Earthsea or something like that. So I enjoyed the Narnia books, but I never felt like they were a huge influence on me.
Yeah. Yeah, that for me, Narnia, if so anyone out there has not read them yet, the bookends are the most heavily like Christian allegory.
Allegorical. Yeah.
Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You get a lot of crucifixion imagery, and the Last Battle, you get a lot of like end of the world, building a new heaven, new earth kind of thing. So those are fine, but the middle books actually are the ones that I like the most, because he still speaks. It's almost parabolic, a lot of them, but they're a lot more unique. You can't. It's not like it immediately recalls certain biblical stories or anything, even though like there's definitely sort of morals that are placed there. But I find those to be much more imaginative. My favorite is Voyage of the Dawn Treader for sure.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
is
Yeah.
that same reason. It's much more sort of like unique and exploratory, and feels not just like a one-to-one. That's being cruel to C.S. Lewis. It's never one-to-one, but
Yeah. No, it's
sometimes it's heavy.
yeah, it can be. I'll tell you what grabbed me even more than his Narnia books was C.S. Lewis's space trilogy.
I haven't read that, but a lot of people have told me that
Yeah.
Out of the Silent Planet, I think, is that the first one?
I think so. It's been a while since I read them, but those had a big impact on me at the time that I read them as probably a teenager. Uh, I actually loved his space trilogy and reread it, I think, a couple times as a teen. And that one I remember distinctly feeling like, okay, this is something really cool here, what he was doing here. So you're
I'm
looking for
trying
a
to look
copy?
around. I have a someone just donated like one of like a second edition of those books, and they're in a box set, and it's all
I have the
paper.
box set. Let me go get it so you can see what it
All right.
looks like. I'll be right back. You keep talking. I got mine.
Yes. Oh, it's the same one.
Yeah,
Wait,
that's what I figured.
where did it go?
So the first one is Out of the Silent Planet, and then there's Paralandra, and then there's That Hideous Strength. So yeah.
That man, that's a great names for books. Yeah, look, we have the same set.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice. Yeah, you should read it. I think you'll find it interesting. And there were other C.S. Lewis books too that I read and enjoyed a lot as a teen, especially probably into my early 20s. But I think the Space Trilogy was probably my favorite thing by C.S. Lewis. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
actually interesting. Looking back on it now, much more influential for C.S. Lewis on me than his fiction is a lot of his religious writings.
like the Screwtape
Um,
Letters and stuff like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, the Four Loves. So
Yeah.
because he's very much I would call an inclusive a Christian. He
Uh-huh.
believed in a form of universalism, which sorry, I don't know if anyone ever knows these terms. Basically, universalism is that like everyone will be saved
Hmm.
by God. And Christian universalism, obviously, that's through Jesus. But the idea is larger than just Christianity. But he was part of that, which growing up was kind of a big no-no in my religious community.
Uh-huh.
Um, he was very influential about having sort of that more cohesive, say, like hopeful and loving view of Christianity,
Yeah.
rather than more sort of judgmental focus on sin version that unfortunately I think is kind of the de jour flavor of Christianity for most people. But
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I actually grew up in a less conservative form of Christianity. My father was a United Church of Christ pastor,
okay.
which tends to be one of the more progressive denominations. For example, many years ago, I don't know exactly when, but they were marrying gay couples, for example, long before a lot of people even thought about it.
That's great.
It's a much more progressive branch. So those are out there too. There's all
Yep.
kinds of
Those give
different.
me those give me hope for Christianity. I think one day I'll sort of come back to a church in that stripe. I'm thinking, who knows?
Yeah, yeah, you never know. I think it's good to be open to stuff, though, for sure. But C.S. Lewis was a big part of my life too, for sure. And then I read as a older teen, Joseph Campbell actually became a big sort of eye opener for me because I really
The
got into
story of the
mythology.
hero or his
The
fiction?
hero, the hero with a thousand faces. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Oh yeah,
and
that's what.
yeah, yeah. But he has lots of other books too. He's pretty well versed in Eastern, like Buddhism and Hinduism and that sort of thing. In fact, I think Buddhism and Hinduism are very central to a lot of what he has to say in a lot of his writing. And he, of course, grew up Roman Catholic, so he was somebody who's like, "Oh, you can read myths this way." That was kind of like my reaction to Joseph Campbell's. Oh, this is so cool. And there was something about the universality. And I realized that a lot of people dismiss Joseph Campbell as being, reductionist and, blah, blah, blah. But for me at that age, it was what I needed in many ways, I think, because it was an introduction to the notion that the stories that had moved me connected me with people all over the world, with
Mm,
the stories that moved them had similar things going on in them. And I found that to be a very liberating and to be a very beautiful thing, that I could be connected to people anywhere in the world through our stories and the common psychological functions of those stories. It was eye opening for me to read Joseph Campbell. That was a big moment in my life. Have you read Campbell before?
only Hero of a Thousand Faces, and it
Uh,
was it was in college for
uh-huh.
a I think an English assignment, so it didn't quite um hit me then. More so sort of uh critiquing Campbell in a lot of my postmodern
Yeah,
studies.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah.
but they do take him seriously. I mean, the nice thing about postmodernism is that when they critique people, for the most part, it's for being too um rigid, not for being wrong.
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh.
so and so that's kind of where I mean, again, my postmodern video, I don't go after, but I use Campbell as like an example of modernism, sort of the
Right, right.
easiest accessible version, which I still think is fair. But I think he I mean, obviously he understood story to a really strong and great degree. And it
Hmm.
also sounds kind of like he allowed you to like get the experience of travel without traveling. Cause that also was a huge formative part of me, is when I started traveling.
Yep,
First time I
yep.
went out of the country was to Southeast Asia when I was in high school. And it's just so eye-opening to see people living in different ways than you are, and yeah, seeing the world is much different than your experience. And then travel to Europe a lot in college as well. I studied abroad a little bit, so
Yep, yep.
that changes you. And so it sounds like that facilitated that for you. And I know you have traveled even more than me, especially in Southeast Asia, Nepal, those areas.
Yeah, yeah. I lived in Nepal. I also lived in Europe for a time, mostly in Germany, and I've traveled all over the UK. Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar. A lot of people who love reading also love traveling because you're feeding a similar part of your imagination, I think, when you're doing those activities, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was a big part of my uh, I guess reading journey. And then, as I said, I tried to expand with fantasy, and actually starting my fantasy novels class was part of my attempt to broaden my reading. And so I read N.K. Jemison's the Broken Earth trilogy, and then I read Abercrombie, and I read the first Law stuff and Mark Lawrence's stuff. And I just started, I was basically Googling top 10 fantasy series or
Yeah.
best fantasy, whatever. So I was just trying to read what everyone was saying was great. And of course, in the course of that, I came across Malazan, and I read the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And at the time, I didn't know anyone who had read it or would read it, and I had no one whatsoever to talk to about it. And it was just
Yeah.
sort of this wow. Can you imagine? I mean, just this amazing experience of reading this incredible series and then just being like, now what do I do? You know?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Did you read
So
all the way through by yourself the first time?
I read all 10 books the first
Wow.
time I attempted it. And it was a few years before I started the YouTube channel. So I know it's not an early Malazan reader. I didn't read Gardens of the Moon when it came out or anything like that. But when I started reading, I think I read it within about a year or so, the 10 books. So yeah, and I knew that there was something special here. And I also knew that I didn't get a lot of things and that I would need to reread this series,
Uh,
and that I wanted to read all the other stuff because I'd heard, okay, there's this other guy, Esselmont, who has
yeah.
written all these other books, and that maybe they'll help me understand this one. And there are these prequel books and other stuff. So I was like, one of the things I definitely wanted to do when I started my channel was to do a Malazan reread slash read, to read everything else and to reread the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So that was when you met me. I mean, it was sort of that was
Yeah.
early days.
Little
Yeah.
did you know that you would meet the advanced reader of the last couple of books to guide you along the way.
I mean, that was incredible. Yeah, it's a story I never get tired of telling. How AP Canavan, he left a couple, messages. He must have been watching some YouTube and stumbled across my channel when it was still not, I don't know how many subscribers I had, maybe 1,000 or something back then. But he somehow came across a couple of my videos, one on the history of fantasy, and another was actually a Dresden Files video.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, AP's read all the Dresden Files books, and has actually pretty cool things to say about them too. But anyway, yeah,
Has he put that on his page? I have not heard him talk about Dresden Files before, but I've also been off BookTube for a couple months. So
yeah, I don't think he's ever done videos on his channel about Dresden Files, except to mention them as examples of some particular narrative thing. Like recently, he did
yeah,
talk about Harry Dresden as a narrator in one of his videos. But yeah,
yeah. And I remember he talked about the structure of sort of an A plot line, B plot line, C plot line, and kind of the formula. I remember he did a great little thing on that. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yep. That was one of his points in one of his comments. But yeah, so I mean, this was, and I figured this guy, he really knows what he's talking about here. He seems pretty articulate and pretty smart. And so we got into kind of an exchange in the comment section of my video, and then I asked him, I think I asked, are you an academic? Or I asked him about his dissertation or something like that. And he didn't reply. And I thought, oops, maybe I was being a little too personal there.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, shoot, I mean, he seems like an interesting guy, but no reply on that. And I thought, okay, well, maybe he'll come back and, give me another comment somewhere or other. And
It's like high school dating. Like, oh, did I say the wrong thing?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I mean, you always think twice sometimes when you're interacting with people online, because you don't mean to be nosy or offensive or anything, but you don't. People can't see your face and hear your tone when you're asking questions. So, but anyway, yeah, I thought, okay, maybe I scared him away by asking a personal question there. So I was at this point, I was reading. I was reading Esselmont's Paths to Ascendancy, and I was on the second book, and I happened to notice when I read the acknowledgments this time the name AP Canavan. And I thought, oh my God, that has to be the same guy, because
yeah.
he was Esselmont's advanced reader, one of his advanced readers. And I thought, oh my God, that must be the same guy. How weird. And I swear to God, it was maybe a minute after I read his name in Esselmont's acknowledgments in Dead House Landing that I got a direct message on Twitter from AP Canavan. And it was
Oh,
so
wow.
weird. Yeah, it was so weird. And he said, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't reply to your last comment. I've been busy," or something like that. And so, but he just wanted to just, kind of say hello. And I was holding the book and looking at his name, and suddenly he DMs me on Twitter.
That
And
is
it was so
awesome.
weird. And then I wrote back to him. I said, "Well, as it happens, I'm reading Dead House Landing right now, and this time I looked at the acknowledgments." And he was like, "Yeah, that's me." So
Wow.
yeah.
That's wonderful. That's a
Yeah,
great
that's how
story.
we met. And then, of course, he agreed to do the read along with me, and the rest is history, I guess. But yeah, it was really cool. And I think Steven Erickson had been sort of pushing him to start a channel as well. So
He says often that you and Steven Erickson pushed him
yeah,
to start the channel.
yeah, yeah. I think that's fair. And I think we're all very glad that a critical dragon
Yeah.
is a
Oh,
thing now.
absolutely.
Yeah. But even before YouTube, AP had been writing under the name, a blog under the name A Critical Dragon. So, and he's got all kinds of really, yeah, I don't know if you've read any of his stuff before, but he's got some
I
really
haven't
cool,
at all. No, I didn't know that
yeah.
existed.
Yeah, he's some awesome essays and reviews and stuff like that under the Critical Dragon blog, which I think he has a link to on his YouTube page. But yeah, I think that's there. You can find it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, you probably would enjoy his essays, I think. Yeah. So yeah, so that's how that happened. But Malazan is why you started your channel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of similar to you, I read it for the first actually. So the first time I ever heard about Malazan was a gaming group I was a part of, and one of the guys, shout out Jim, was reading it, but he described it. I shouldn't have shouted him out because I'm about to make fun of him, but he described it as, oh yeah, it's this huge world. There's a bunch of battles, and there's like a zombie army that is like attacking. That's how he described it to me, which now I know he's talking about the Talana Mass, but like
Right.
I was kind of like, okay, that sounds like some weird sword and sorcery. I don't know what crazy thing. Like, yeah, okay, Jim, sure. And but kind of serendipitously, I was just at a used bookstore later on, and Gardens of the Moon was there, and it was the crazy mullet version of Gardens of the Moon.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so I looked, and it confirmed that this is some crazy sword and sorcery, crazy zombie army. But I was like, I can get it for, whatever it was, $2. So I picked it up. It was just in the house. And you know how when things are on the shelf, it's kind of, you see it and it's kind of in the back of your mind. And so eventually I picked it up, read it. First time, Gardens of the Moon, liked some of it overall, as a lot of people's first experience was like,
Yeah.
eh, it's good. It seems like just a lot of stuff is happening. It's kind of a weird narrative form. And so I didn't go to Dead House. Oh no, so I was like, I'll try Dead House Gates. And then I got about 50 pages into Dead House Gates, the Mappo Akarium stuff, and I was like, all right, this is not grabbing me. And so I picked it up, which obviously now I acknowledge is, stupid, ha ha ha, Andy. But yeah, it happens. And then years later, it was why did I pick it up again? I think it was just honestly, I kept it on the shelf and it sort of stayed in my mind, and sort of kept going. And then, yeah, picked it up, read it again. I did an Instagram post on it so I could look the exact date, but I think it was like 2019. And it's just much more taken with it, whether it was my taste that evolved or whether I was just at a better place, who knows why these things work and don't. But immediately I was like, this is, this is some good red meat. And so I read it very quickly. And then I was a
Yeah.
little nervous about Dead House Gates because that's where I'd hit a wall before, but I was like, you know what? I'm committing to this. And once you get into that story, obviously Dead House Gates is incredible.
Oh
And
yeah.
then read right into Memories of Ice. And that's when I think Memories of Ice is really the hook, line, and sinker, because it puts together a lot of the elements you've been around, and so powerful. One of the most powerful emotional moments of the whole series is, I think, the end of that book, Black Coral. And so
Yeah.
after I'd read Memories of Ice, I really was like, I want to see what people are saying. And that's when I was just about getting into BookTube. And so I was like, oh, Daniel Green will have something. So I looked up, he had nothing. And then I kind of did some searching, and there's nothing. Well, I should say there was one review. What's her name? I think her name was like, what is it?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, she was actually very good, but she was the only person I could find that did reviews
Kennedy.
on
Her
these.
last name was Kennedy.
Yes, yes. I think she has since started a family, and so that's why she's not on BookTube anymore, because she's
Yeah,
understandably busy. But
yeah,
she was the only one who had anything.
yeah.
And they were great. But it was either that or someone read Gardens of the Moon and like me was like, yeah, this is kind of weird, and that's kind of it. Like no like analytical stuff. And so the more I read, the more I was like, I really want to start like talking about this series and recommending people. I don't know why I didn't find Iskar Jurak, but he was even like just starting by the time I found him.
Yeah, he was just starting
Uh,
up. Yeah.
and
Yeah,
so
I
yeah,
think
that's why
I'm
I
not sure, but I think Graceless Passion was around before as well. But somehow I also didn't know about that channel
yeah.
either.
I mean, you know, searching YouTube, you find all kinds of weird stuff, and so I probably just didn't search the right thing to find their stuff. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and it was just like there's so much stuff to talk about, whether it's just fun talking about the story, whether it's the themes, and then eventually, by the time I read Toll the Hounds, that's when I was like, I really want to do a video specifically on
oh,
postmodernism, which is something I'm very passionate about,
yep,
and Malazan. He was doing stuff in here that I had never seen in this genre that I knew pretty well even then. Um, and even generally, in fiction, there's a couple people who are known as kind of post-modern authors, but honestly, most of the time, I'm not a huge fan of how they do it.
uh-huh.
Um, but anyway, so when I finished the series, I that's when I really started making outlines and notes to do that postmodern video. And then that's when Steven Erickson commented on it, and it was just like
Yeah.
I was like literally running around my apartment. I was like, Anna, that's my wife, like, check this out.
Yeah,
And
I
she
remember
was
very well. I remember that video, of course. I think it might be the first time Steven Erickson commented on a video on YouTube. Or I'm
around that
actually,
time. We started commenting a couple, so I don't
yeah,
know if it was the first, but it's kind of in that first round. And he put it on his Facebook like wall and blog, which was like
yeah.
it blew me out of the water.
And it's a, by the way, if you guys haven't seen Andy's Malazan postmodern video, it's absolutely brilliant. And it's a favorite of mine, remains one of the most impressive videos I've seen on BookTube. It's a brilliant video. And is it your most watched video?
Thank you. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
It should be. I mean, it's just brilliant. It's a great video. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really fun to make because it's two great, passions I have, and I'm kind of a teacher at heart anyway, so it was fun to kind of put that together in sort of like a fun lecture idea, and hopefully help people read the series. I do think like it's
Yeah.
helpful to go in with some of the knowing it's going to be a little different, especially than like people who read Brandon Sanderson. They really like Stormlight Archive, and they search like other epic fantasy, and Malazan comes up, and those are just very different flavors of storytelling.
Yep.
Almost couldn't be different, or even though they're in the same genre. And so
Yeah.
I think that's why you come in with those expectations, it's not going to jive with you because it's not that same thing. But I think if you're ready for it, it's a really powerful experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just chatting yesterday with a group of people. The video will be coming out later on Alex's channel, Tall Guy Reads, and he's involved in a group read of Malazan that's going to be starting in January, I think. But
Okay.
he and Josh from Red Fury Books, and Jordan from Jordan Reads, and Ian the Reader. So the four of them are.
Are these all newish channels?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess more or less. Yeah, yeah, they are. I
You
mean,
leave for 6 months and you miss all the cool new people.
yeah, I know. I think Red Fury Books has been around a while, but the others, I'm not sure exactly how long they've been around, but they're probably newer than we were anyway. So, but yeah, they're doing a Malazan read, and they very graciously asked me to come chat with them they want to talk to, for every book, a Malazan veteran, and I guess I'm a veteran now.
You definitely are, Philip.
So, but yeah, they basically asked me a bunch of questions, and one of them was about I think they're all feeling a bit scared about taking up the series because they hear, oh, so many people don't finish the series and blah, blah, blah. And it's so hard. And my response to that, and of course, it's definitely a response that is informed by my read with AP and things that AP has said about the series too. But my response is, I don't think you have to be super smart to read the series. I think it's more important to be willing to have your expectations overturned, to be okay with a fantasy series that doesn't follow the tropes, that maybe even subverts the tropes. And if you're willing to go along with that, I think it's fine. You don't have to be a genius or anything to read this series at all. It is really, that's not the issue. The issue is I think a lot of people kind of feel like they don't get what's going on because we have expectations as fantasy readers. We expect the
Yep.
tropes to happen in a certain way. Where's the hero? Where's the one who's going to save the world? And so when we encounter this Malazan thing, it's like, what is this, right? And I think if we can set aside those expectations, it's going to make the read a lot more interesting and fun. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. My number one piece of advice that I give to people when they're reading Malazan is just read it. Don't take notes. It's okay if you don't understand things. I know some people just like taking notes, so that's fine if it's really going to get like.
I
You're
don't.
not going to get anything. You're made to be confused at times. That's fine. That does not mean you're doing something wrong or, like you said, like you're stupid or anything. Like that's part of this world, just like the world we live in, right? You're never going to know everything about everything. You're going to forget people and they're going to come back into the story and then you'll slowly get to know them again. And that's fine. Like, do not feel like you have to go. Like, I even tell people, like, don't look or read or reference the personas
Dramatis personae.
personae. There we go. I don't know why I'm dramatis personae. Don't feel like you have to know that. If you want to look back just for fun, go for it. But like, just read. The most important thing is to get through it because you do get a flow. And even to the end of the book, like we know in Crippled God, new characters are introduced and leave the narrative. It's always going to happen because that's, again, I think Erickson is rightly like, that's how the world is, right? I'm going to go after this call. I'm going to go to work. And at work, there's going to be someone that come in. I don't know who they are. I don't know their story. And I might learn it or I might not. They might just go see their movie. And that's how the world is. And I think that's how this story is.
Your cat is wanting to go up on your bookshelf there.
So this is our new kitty. We just got her this week.
Aww.
So little Minnesota. Let's see if I can get her. There she is.
There she is. Hello.
She's 4 months old and she's still very nervous.
Aww.
So
and very much exploring there. Yeah, look at her explore.
So she's just getting used to the house, and we haven't introduced her yet to our first cat, Callie. So Minnesota is in this room, and then Callie is in the other room.
Okay, Callie as in California.
Yes, yeah. So
wait, does this mean you're gonna get 50 cats?
I sure hope not. No, so California is my home state, and then Minnesota is my wife's home state. So
okay,
I'm gonna stop here.
Okay, okay. You sure you don't want a Vermont or a New Jersey or anything like that?
We'll see. I mean, the other states we've lived in as a married couple is Illinois and Florida. So they're not great names. I mean, Florida, I guess
Florida's a good one. Florida's a good one, yeah.
Flow, because he has to have a nice short one.
Yeah.
Illinois is harder.
Ill is not a good name for a cat. Yeah.
Not a great cat.
You can't make a good name out of either part of that because it's either ill or annoy. So
yeah, not great.
Oh well. All right. We'll scrap the whole 50 cat thing then.
Okay. I'm glad. I don't think I could do 50 cats.
Yeah. So wow. Well, obviously we have, I think, a shared passion in Malazan, and I never thought that anything could surpass the experience I had with Tolkien, but after
Yeah.
reading everything and rereading the Malazan Book of the Fallen, it's not that I almost feel it's silly sometimes to say, this is my number one, this is my number two, this is my number three. I mean, that's just kind of a thing we do around here. But
Yep.
in actuality, these are stories that I just love, period.
Yep.
But I do feel that Malazan, as much as I like saying, that Tolkien, and this is something I've said a lot of times, Tolkien baptized my imagination, and
Mhm.
Malazan set it free. In other words, what I mean by that is I feel like Malazan points to so many wonderful things that this genre can do, that the genre I mean, and for me, Tolkien is like, and for many people, when you think of fantasy, you think of Tolkien, right? You think of his influence over the genre. He didn't invent fantasy, but his influence over the genre has been greater than probably any other person's. Um, and that's great. I love that. I celebrate that. But I also think there are new directions that fantasy can go in, and I do feel like Erickson and Esselmont kind of point to some possible directions that I appreciate a lot. So I'm excited by that.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, going back to ranking, like, yeah, I think it's somewhat subjective, and every moment of your life that's gonna change or whatever. But as far as like a a tier of like books that have really, like, as I'm reading them, noticed that they have like changed me, that they changed the direction of the river of my life, a real bend in that experience. Like for me, it is Lord of the Rings and Malazan. Like those are
Yep.
uh, they're in a class by themselves as how they have affected me as a reader, as a person, as a thinker, as you know, a living being. So
Yeah.
definitely high up there. And really, as far as books are concerned, I'm trying to think like there's uh actually outside of the fantasy genre, I think the only other one up there would be The Color Purple,
Yeah.
and a nonfiction, two nonfiction books actually. A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn,
Oh
if you've
yeah.
ever read that
Yep.
work. And then this is a very specific one for me. It's a book called Proverbs of Ashes, which is a feminist critique of the Christian atonement.
Uh-huh.
Which so it's a very specific thing for me, but it was a very formative moment. But yeah, few
Cool.
books have had as much influence on me as Malazan.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing what I think it can do for people. Yeah. Yeah. And in my case, I would have to add, things like Beowulf and Old English poetry and the Norse, the Eddas and the sagas and stuff like that. And then I've also read a fair amount, although I can't claim expertise in, but I've read a lot of the Celtic stuff like the Mabinogion and some of the early Irish myths. And I've also read the Mahabharata and the Ramayana from South Asia. And, these are very important texts for me as well. They're
Well, and those now, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong now, that's part of your family life, right? Because your wife is
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Nepal. So
Yep.
it's now even personally so much more important to you because it's, not your culture, but it's your family's culture.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So I'm fortunate to have married into a Nepali family, and I lived in Nepal, of course, which is where we met. And the while I was there, I tried to learn the language, and I speak some Nepali, not great, but I can have conversations with little kids. And I also tried to
What is
read.
sorry, I don't know, Nepalese, what's the linguistic family there?
Oh
Is
yeah,
it,
yeah. No, don't get me going on linguistics, but yeah, yeah. It is a descendant of Sanskrit, which
oh, okay.
is like Hindi and Bangla and Punjabi and Gujarati, and most of the northern Indian languages are all
Okay.
descended from Sanskrit, as is Nepali. And
Okay.
it's
So it's not tonal at all. It's not
no, not like you
like
mean like
the Far Eastern
Mandarin or something like that. No,
tonal languages.
not
Okay,
at all.
more interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Sorry,
And
I also love linguistics and philology, so we could probably get off into an area that no one else would be super interested in. But hey,
but
if you
yeah,
read Babel, you should be interested in this.
I do want to read Babel. I read R.F. Kuang's The Poppy War trilogy, and I liked it. There were things about it that I thought could maybe, if she had been a more mature writer, would have done a little better. But I loved the central character Rin and all of that, and so I definitely feel like this is a writer who I want to read more of. And Babel sounds like a book that would be ideal for me because of the focus
Oh,
on linguistics and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. It hit me really in the right. I mean, I again, because of probably I studied languages, so in seminary I had to be able to read
Yeah. Greek and Hebrew.
the earliest transcripts we had in Hebrew and Greek
Yeah.
of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament. And so like for me, I'd done a lot of philology and linguistics and
Mhm.
talking about semantic range and all this stuff. So for her to actually take that on in this storytelling, I thought was wonderful. I loved it. And she doesn't like pull any punches. Like Schlegel is quoted in Babel. So like
Wow.
there's there's some real like academic rigor going on in there as well, which I really, really enjoyed. And then on top of this, I think this great smart critique of colonialism
That
that
does not
is,
surprise me, having read the
yeah,
Bible before. Yeah.
but not just uh I think there's kind of an easy critique of colonialism, we might say, that's still necessary,
Yeah.
like the military and the takeover, but she is much more interested in the cultural
Uh-huh.
um colonialism
Yeah.
and the sort of ransacking of cultures that were colonialized through language. I think it's so smart.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think you'd really, really like it. I think you have some really, really good important stuff to say. It's one of my favorite standalone it's not really a fantasy book. It's more literary for sure.
Uh-huh.
And I have not read The Poppy War, which I think is a unique experience. Like
Oh
I didn't
yeah.
go in there with expectations of R.F. Kuang. I just was really brought to this story um, and was excited to read it. I really enjoyed it. It's a really quick
Uh,
read. Yeah, I won't give more of a review there, but I think it's really worth reading for sure.
cool. Yeah. Yeah. I'll check out your review when you make it, and I'm sure I will read it eventually. But yeah, what are you reading
Always
now?
more stuff to read.
Are you just coming off of Babel now?
So no, I finished Babel a couple weeks ago. So
Okay.
right now I'm actually reading Anna Karenina,
Oh wow.
Tolstoy,
Cool.
uh,
Yeah.
which has been just wonderful. So I've read Tolstoy is a little, if you're intimidated by War and Peace and Anna Karenina, which is totally understandable because they're big tomes. He has a little book called The Death of Ivan Ilyich,
Oh, I've read
uh,
that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
beautiful story about death. And Tolstoy is just one of my favorite authors.
Yeah.
The way that he writes is just beautiful. And then I read actually he has a series of spiritual writings called The Confession about his spiritual journey that I read. So I was very interested in Tolstoy, didn't know where to start, and then started reading Anna Karenina a couple months ago because someone the right translation was donated to our used bookstore. So I was like, all right, maybe this is the world telling me to start
Nice.
reading it. So
Nice.
great, just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So I'm reading that, and then I'm also reading but you probably know about Edith Hamilton's Mythology.
Yeah, I've
Have you
heard
read
of it.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just a compendium of like very quick. So I'm trying now to always be reading either poetry or a play, and then like a series of short stories, and then my main novel. So
Oh,
um,
cool.
I have my main novel is Anna Karenina. My short stories right now is Mythology with Ian Hamilton, and then I'm cheating a little bit because my play and poetry I'm reading A Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but uh, yeah, so that's what I'm up to currently.
Yeah,
So
I actually want to read her Circe probably at some point.
oh,
Yeah.
wonderful, and it's a great. The writing is beautiful. It's a really quick read. It's a good palate cleanser if you're like in the midst of if you're in the midst of something really big and epic.
Yeah.
A, a reading of Circe, like this 350 beautiful love story book character study, I think is great. What are you reading right now?
I am in the middle of R. Scott Baker's The Darkness That Comes Before, which is the first book in the Prince of Nothing trilogy. Um,
Yeah, that's I was just joking with
Jimmy?
uh yeah, Jimmy about how
Yeah.
people always, if they hear you like Malazan, they're immediately like, oh, darkness that comes before, darkness that comes before. Check out R. Scott Baker. And I said both because I think he is more a philosophical, grim dark, so to speak, fantasy writer. That Erickson is all usually painted as being, and Canadian, which Erickson
Yeah.
definitely is. So
Yep.
I think,
And
what do you
also,
think about it?
probably because Erickson is quoted right on the front cover of The Darkness That Comes Before.
Oh, is he? Okay,
Yeah, he's
that
got a
makes
little
sense.
blurb there. Yeah, he's got a little blurb on the front cover. Something about this being the beginning of something really special. Or I can't. I'm mangling Erickson's endorsement there, but something to that degree.
I'm
Uh,
sure it's some beautiful metaphor that he thought of,
yeah, yeah.
off the cuff.
Yeah. It's an interesting read so far. I don't think it is exactly Malazan-esque, though. It's not the first series that comes to mind to me as a comparison. It's incredibly well written. Our Scott Baker is a very talented writer. I can say that without a doubt. So far, though, I would also describe it as, and don't get me wrong, there's bleakness in Malazan too, but this is almost relentlessly bleak. And
Mhm.
it doesn't have the Malazan humor. Um, and so far, anyway, and I'm still halfway through or so, a little more than halfway through, actually, the very first book in this trilogy. So, but so far, I don't see a ton of beauty or connection or anything like that. So, but the guy can write. I mean, I'm just like my mouth is hanging open while I'm reading some of the passages. But so he's very talented. But yeah, if you want to feel warm and fuzzy, don't read The Darkness That Comes Before. That
I'll have to wait till the dark dregs of winter here in Minnesota, and maybe then I'll pull it out.
might be the appropriate time.
Grim, the grim mood.
Yeah, yeah. But he's certainly a very talented writer. He's one I've been meaning to get to forever. And the other one I've been meaning to get to forever is Gene Wolfe, which is, the Book of the New Sun. And I actually have those books. I've got them. So
Yeah.
eventually I'll get to those. But I have a ton of things I have to read. I have a ton of things of commitments and that I'm all excited about, really. So I've got some self-published books that I need to read very soon because I'm trying to do one a month, a self-published book, and cover it on the channel. And I am successful most months, but I'm always behind schedule. So
Yeah.
yeah,
How have you found that journey? 'Cause, I have not read very much self-published at all, to be quite honest. I mean, the only ones I
yeah,
think I've ever read is Sword of Kaigan, which was wonderful
yeah. I
and
hear that.
incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Daniel Green's first book I read because he sent it to me. But besides that, I haven't made that conscious choice. So how's that journey been?
It's been cool. I'm just sort of part of the motivation is that I have this weird, which I think most booktubers can relate to. I have this weird desire to discover, to be one of the first to find this great writer and shout out about, wow, this is really, I mean, this is such a great book,
The
everybody.
Indiana Jones of reading. You went into the temple and you
Yeah.
found this treasure. Yep.
Yeah, so that's definitely a sort of a silly motivation on my part, but I think that people can relate to that. Another motivation is I really feel strongly that what we do here on BookTube is so important, celebrating stories. And it's probably even more important for self-published or indie press, books because they don't have the same mechanisms, the same ability to get the word out, to market their books. So one important function I think we can have, not that every channel has to do this, but I feel strongly enough about it that it's sort of a part of my mission, I guess you could say, is that I want to shine some light. And I can't read nearly as many as I'd like because, there's just only one little me and there's a lot of books out there. But um, I think it's a thing that I can do that I want to do to sort of give a little bit to the community and to say, okay, shine some light on some books that are worthy of people's attention that you might not hear about otherwise. So that's a big motivation for me doing it, and I'm glad because I've met some really wonderful people this way, and discovered some great books. So
Have you
I,
gotten to interview the other self-published authors on the
yeah, I
channel?
have interviewed quite a few.
Apologize again. I've been away for like 6 months, so I don't know what people have done on YouTube and not.
Yeah, yeah. So I have interviewed quite a few of the self-published authors that I've reviewed their books, and then I've invited them onto the channel for a discussion. And that hasn't happened every time, the discussion, but quite a few times. So I had Richard Nell on the channel. I had the author of Dreams of the Dying, Nicholas Lietzau. I had him on the channel. I had
That's who I've heard of. That sounds familiar. Dreams of the Dying.
yeah, that's one I think you would appreciate, actually. It's a fantasy book, but he really tackles the theme of depression head on in that book, and does a really good job with it. Highly recommend it. And yeah, I've had a couple others, and I'm going to be having one end of this month, beginning of the next month. Von Roycroft was the latest self-published book I read. So I'll be having him on the channel to talk about the first book of his trilogy, which is called The Severing Sun. So yeah, it's a thing I've been doing, and there are people who do more than I do. You know, there's Patrick Leo and Steve Talks Books and channels like that where they're all about promoting self-published authors, which I think is great.
But Patrick cheats because he sneezes and he reads a book. I don't
I
know how that
know.
guy reads so quickly. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm not a fast reader, so when there are booktubers who say, "Well, I only read 150 books this year," I'm like, "Huh?" You know. I'm lucky if I can get to 50 for this, because I also read for my day job. So it's yeah. But but to me, it's not about the quantity so much as the experience. Okay, so we are back after a quick break, and I forget what we were talking about, but um, we were talking about what we're reading, I guess, lately, right? More or less.
Yep, there we go. Yep.
Yeah. So in that light, I guess one question I have for you is, where do you want your channel to go? What's in store here on Andy Smith, the YouTube channel?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because the answer honestly is I don't know. Um, so I think for a long time my aim was, I first of all just loved doing it. It was very enjoyable, but also I write a little bit on the side. So in the back of my head was always having like uh, you know, a platform in which I could potentially self-publish something that I was writing.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
um, with my political career, I just haven't had as much time to write as I would like. I also
Sure.
write a lot of nonfiction, like essays or letters to editors and that kind of thing as well. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if it's still something that will happen. I mean, I love writing so much. I think probably I will go back to it. But I think going forward for me, it's just kind of a fun outlet of kind of what it was at the beginning, where it's just like, I want to talk about this stuff, so I will, but less a sort of project in the sense of, I'm not consistent with my videos anymore. I don't really look at analytics at all anymore. So I
Uh-huh.
think for me, it's going to be more like what Andy wants to talk about, or Andy had some time, so he threw together TBR, or like I have something I want to talk about, so I'll talk about it. So like my next video, I'm actually hopefully going to record today. We'll see, is a video recommending classics based on fantasy series you like.
Oh, cool.
And
Nice.
that
Yeah.
comes out of my experience of like I just came off of some fantasy and then I started reading some classics and really loved it.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's kind of going to be, I think, what the channel is going to be for a little while.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's healthy. Yeah. I mean, we do this out of love. This is a hobby. We love doing this. It does not pay the bills.
There's no money in BookTube.
Yeah.
Like at most, it'll pay for maybe like one book that I'll buy a month. Like
Hmm.
that's the kind of money we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am with my channel. It pays for itself, I think. I think I can say that at this point.
That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially if like it can I think I'm probably close to breaking even, but then I'll buy an expensive camera and then it's, back to square one.
Ouch. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so that's it's not a thing you do to make a ton of money, that's for sure. So it's a passion, it's a hobby, and if it ever comes to a point where it feels like a job, where it feels like, oh, oh, I got to make a video because I got to keep the algorithm going, and blah
Yeah.
blah, whatever that is. I have no idea because I occasionally peek at the analytics, and I really kind of like, oh, that looks good, I guess. If I
Yeah.
get a green check mark, that means good, right? Or
Yep.
whatever,
Yep.
an up arrow or a down arrow or whatever. I don't
Yeah.
really think about it too much, to be honest with you. And I can't, because there are certain things we were just talking about, the fact that I'm covering self-published books. And the truth of the matter is, I think this won't be a revelation to anyone, but my lowest viewed videos are definitely, in general, reviews, which is, I think, a shame on BookTube that reviews don't do well. And secondly, especially self-published books, because people tend to watch the reviews, if they do watch reviews at all, of books that they already know.
Yeah.
So, it's
Yeah.
very, yeah,
That's one of the tragedies that I have as well, is like the even for me, the reason I got on BookTube was more like reviews of books. Like I would either
yeah,
think about reading a book and find a review on it and see what they say on it, or finish a book and want to hear what someone else's opinion on it was. So I'm a big
right.
like I like to watch reviews, but you're right. It's definitely, unless it's actually for me, it's if I'm critical of a major work, those will do well.
Yeah.
Um, but like just a regular, so like solid review of something I read and liked and have some criticism or whatever, that I think would be helpful for people to watch. Yeah, it's definitely not. That's not what the BookTube community kind of is searching for.
I guess. I mean, it's a shame in a way, but the almighty algorithm is something that you want people. Obviously, we make videos because we want people to watch them, just like people write books because they want people to read them. So it is something that I don't think about a ton, and I do things probably that are not good for channel growth, because they're things I want to do and I think are good to do. Um,
Yep, I think that's
but
healthy. Good choice, Philip.
yeah, yeah. And so I'm saying all that because I think your view of your channel as an outlet, a place for you to kind of do what you want, I think is healthy. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I think for many of us being part of this community is just we want to be part of the conversation. We don't imagine ourselves ever being at a point where this is going to be our bread and butter, or anything like that. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited about that because that is, for a little while I was trying to be disciplined of like a couple of videos a week, which
Yeah.
I really enjoyed. And if I had like a 9 to 5, I think I'd be able to do that and really
Yep.
enjoy the discipline that it takes to do that.
Yep.
But with kind of the way that my life and schedule is right now, it's like if it's gonna energize me, I'll do it. But if I can't, I just can't at the moment. Which yeah, I'm okay with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that keeps it, I think, a healthy perspective on it, honestly. Because
Yeah.
I've certainly kind of fallen victim to that notion that, oh, I got to do another video this week, even if I don't have anything that I feel like is important to say. It's like, no, got to have a video to keep the
Algorithm
make the
gods.
sacrifice to the almighty algorithm god. So, and I'd rather be like, and there have been weeks when I've said, no, I actually don't feel like I need to do anything here because I haven't finished a book that I want to review yet. And why am I going to do this? Force myself to make something just for the sake of satisfying the algorithm. And people are going to, I think, read, if I can sort of fake enthusiasm and all that, but I think people will get, that I'm not really into it. So I don't want to do that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of algorithm, just curious because I haven't looked. What is your like most watched videos? Like what are things that really like people gravitate towards? I'm guessing your top 10, but I don't know what.
Yeah. So the last time I looked, my more recent top 10 video, the one from 2021, that video has 222,000 views. So
Wow.
yeah, that by far, there's nothing even close. And that's the one where I sort of said, you know, I never thought anything would surpass Lord of the Rings, but here's Malazan, and then that video has made the rounds, I guess.
You're
So
getting the good word out.
yeah, I guess. I mean, that's by far my most watched video. My next most watched video, I think at this point, is my why Malazan Book of the Fallen is among the best fantasy video, which I made when I was still saying Malazan. And
Yeah.
before I knew you, before I knew Iskar, before I knew, it was when I just started the channel essentially. And I was just sort of putting out what I thought were great fantasy reads. And it was one of the videos. And that was my first video to ever actually, I mean, I think it has like 45,000 views. So it's not like viral or whatever, but it's for a channel of my size, I think that's a lot of views.
Yeah.
So, and then I have some others that are 30,000 and some that are, a lot of them are Malazan related actually, but not all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, the thing I'm doing now with Murphy Napier, the Vinland Saga, that just came out, the one on my channel, and that's done remarkably well. Understandably, because Murphy Napier is in it, but also because I think manga is a big thing out
I was
there.
gonna say there's a big appetite for manga content. I mean,
Yeah,
I've never done it myself, but just looking at people who do that and the view numbers and
yeah,
the community, and not even just numbers, but like people really like talking about that. It's not a medium I've ever connected with.
yeah.
Well, I guess this is the Vin Saga is kind of your first go around with this, I think, or at least
It's
like
my
you haven't
first
had time. How are
manga.
you?
Yeah, it feels like coming home to me though, because I grew up on comic books. I loved
Okay.
comic books when I was growing up. I was a big time comic book collector. I even have a video on the channel with my comics in it. So in that sense, and I know manga is not the same as American comics, but there are some similarities. And so for me, it was kind of like, I like this. I'm having fun with this. And also, Vinland Saga, I think it was a lot of people I think have recommended, but it was Murphy that really sort of convinced me to just go for it and do it while I was talking to her on this series, Dear Doctor.
Yeah, I've seen that one on the Dear Doctor
Yeah.
Fantasy.
And so I said, okay, well, I'm just going to take the plunge and do it. And it was the perfect recommendation because Vinland Saga is things Old Norse and Old English and all that, and that's my wheelhouse. So it made sense, and I'm having a blast with it actually. And I have to be honest with you, I didn't realize the extent to which there's some really great storytelling that takes
Mhm.
place in manga. Obviously, there are people who haven't read manga who might think it's just for kids or something like that because there are pictures or whatever.
Yeah.
The visual component of the manga actually is something that the a skilled storyteller uses really well. There are certain things like a symbol that recurs. They do a lot of foreshadowing, and a lot of it happens visually. So there's some really sophisticated, really cool storytelling that goes on in manga. I have to say, so far, that's what I'm finding from reading the first 4 books of Vinland Saga. So I'm not an expert, but I'm actually really pleasantly. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm actually really a lot of respect. My hats off to certainly Makoto Yukimura for what he's done in Vinland Saga, because I think that he's done some really cool storytelling here.
Good.
And he does take liberties with the history, which is great. I mean, that's what a good storyteller does. You take stuff from the world and you make it into a cool story, and he's really done that. So
Excellent. Yeah,
yeah.
never been, I've never read a manga, so that's great to hear.
Well, this is one of these things that I never would have done if I hadn't gotten involved in BookTube, you know. And I'm sure there are books you've read because of BookTube. I
Oh,
read, you know, probably the first series I started because BookTube wouldn't have done on my own was Stephen King's Dark Tower. And then Poppy War was another one. And then now I'm reading manga, and, you know, it's because of BookTube. And knowing people like Jimmy and Alan who are, and Joanna as well. She's read Vinland Saga. A lot of our friends have read manga, so I'm like, no, maybe I should try it, you know? So,
yeah, that's great.
so what are you going to do it? Are you going to read a manga?
I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm not against it. It's just kind of the opportunity cost of I could be reading other things. Um, and speaking of visually, like I think because I'm so into film also,
Yep.
I'm so taken with that visual medium that I don't know, it's just never something that drew me. I mean, I feel like you said, so many people I respect have really enjoyed it. So maybe I'll have to pick it up at some point, but I have no immediate plans.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, that was me just a few months ago. So,
Yeah.
so you never know. But yeah,
Check back in the winter. Who knows?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm fickle.
Well, and the cool thing too is now that I'm actually reading a manga series is I'm getting, I mean, you know how fandoms are, right? They are excited when somebody new discovers what they love and they want to share. Oh, you might like this series too. So I'm getting some really cool recommendations, and the way they describe these things, it's kind of like, wow, I think I probably would like that too.
Yeah.
So, but we'll see where that goes. But for now, I intend to read through Vinland Saga, and I'm really enjoying the experience, which is good.
Good. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm trying to think of any other questions that we could cover while we're here together, and probably I'll think of
Yeah.
several after we're done recording. But
Exactly. Yes.
that's how that goes.
Um, uh, Maybe I'll ask this since I'm making a classics and fantasy collection. Are there any classics, use that term however you like, that have if someone asked you for a classic recommendation, what would you say?
A classic that fantasy readers should read, or
Yes, and I'm gonna give you a caveat that it cannot be Beowulf because I
well,
know
that's the first answer.
I know
Yeah.
that's what you're gonna say. And actually, I should say, so
Okay.
this video that I'm gonna make, I talk about this, or I will. I haven't recorded it yet. That like I made a rule that I couldn't go the easy route, so I'm not allowed to say Homer or Shakespeare
Oh.
or any of the old myths because I wanted to hit like some stuff that people wouldn't normally pick up. So there you
Oh.
go. There's a hard caveat for you. You can't you
Ooh.
can't say Beowulf. I knew you were gonna say it.
Yeah. Well, you and I had our Beowulf discussion, so
That
which
was,
was
that was wonderful. I was so glad to be able to reread that not in school, because it's a really fun story, great language.
okay. Well, so I don't know if this is cheating or not with those criteria, but I would suggest, I think if I say the Eddas, that also they're disqualified, right? I mean, from if you're using those criteria, or
I think so, but not a lot of people read so talk about those epics,
okay.
but then I'm gonna force you to say something else. So
Okay.
first, the
So the Eddas, if you haven't heard of them, there are two Eddas, as it were. One is the Elder or Poetic Edda, as it's called, which is it's a collection of poems in Old Norse that were put together in Iceland, and a lot of what we know about Germanic mythology comes from the Eddas, from both of them. And the poems are, you know, there are quite a few great ones that they cover a range of things. There's some gnomic poetry in there, like the Havamal, which is the sayings of Odin. as he's hanging on the ash tree Yggdrasil, the life tree, and he is basically imparting wisdom, the wisdom he gained from sacrificing himself to himself on this tree. And so it's a gnomic poem. And then there are others that are, about Ragnarok, for example. There are poems about the end of the world and that sort of thing. And there are some poems that are pieces of some of the old legends, like stuff you'd find in the Volsung saga and stuff like that. So there's just from the gods and mythology to some of the very early important legendary stories in poetic form. So that's what the Elder Edda is. The Younger Edda, which I actually recommend first. First read the Younger Edda or the Prose Edda, which is by a chap named Snorri Sturluson, who was an Icelandic fellow who was around he wrote this in the early 13th century. And it's essentially, so Iceland had been Christianized for a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
And
yeah, 13th century is rather late in this talking about what we're talking about now.
Absolutely, yeah, because Iceland started to be Christianized around the year 1000. So to have people referring to the gods and all that, Iceland is unusual in that sense. The gods tend to disappear, and they're saints and things like that, and they appear in different places. But for the most part, when a part of Europe got Christianized, they covered up the old gods relatively quickly. But not in Iceland. They still had these poems, and they still had these and Snorri was, though, by the time he was writing, essentially one of the main reasons he wrote the Prose Edda was to explain the old stories so that the modern poets of his day would understand the references. So obviously it was starting to get lost if he had to write this down and to remind people, this is what we mean when you talk about, Odin's steed or whatever. And he would tell the story behind Sleipnir, which is that, eight-legged horse that Loki gave birth to. And he would tell the whole story behind it. So essentially, a lot of what we know about Germanic mythology and legend comes from this Prose Edda. And it's a compendium of a sort to help poets of Snorri's day, but it's also some really cool storytelling. So yeah, those are the two Eddas. And start with the Prose Edda, and then you'll understand more of the Poetic Edda.
Have you been to Iceland before, Philip?
No, it's on my wish list, though. I definitely want to go there. Yeah.
Definitely should go. And the National Museum of Iceland is actually a little out of the way from like downtown Reykjavik, but it is probably my favorite history museum for sure that I've ever been to. One of my favorite museums, period.
Wow.
It's so well cultivated and go over a lot of the stuff you just mentioned. So high recommendation there. But don't think I'm going to let you escape. So that's good. The Eddas for sure that we need to read.
Yeah.
Is it Edda or Ada?
I think most Americans would say Eddas, the Eddas. Yeah.
Okay. I'm studying Greek too long, so it's always Ada for me, but that's just because. Anyway. So, okay. So classic that is not a classic myth.
Oh.
That you would recommend.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm probably breaking the rules again, but Snorri also, while I'm talking about the Eddas, I got to talk about the Heimskringla, which is something that Snorri also wrote, which is, okay, it's part myth, but it's also a history of the kings of Norway, which a lot of Icelanders fled from Norway when Harald Fairhair was consolidating his power over Norway. So they were essentially going after their freedom. They didn't want to bow down to King Harald. So they started settling Iceland. But they were still very much culturally connected to Norway and to Scandinavia in general. So Snorri wrote this sort of history of the world, I guess, as it were, the Heimskringla, which begins mythological, but it pretty soon gets into historical, and we get all the way up until just about his own time in terms of the kings of Norway. And there's some great stories in there that he tells along the way. They're very saga-like some of the great sagas like Egil's saga or Njal's saga or something of that nature. So, speaking of which, the Icelandic sagas, there's some great non-mythological ones, because yes, you do have the mythological sagas like the Volsung saga or Hrolf Kraki's saga, but you also have some just like they're more domestic. They're like novels almost, from the 13th century, and they're stories of Icelanders, and they're not so supernatural as much as the mythological ones. But yeah, does that count? Is that a good recommendation?
Yeah. I don't think I'm gonna be able to get you away from Old Norse stories. So no, that's great.
I mean, I do read modern
I
stuff
was
too.
ready for you to say like, I don't know, Great Expectations or something, but no, I should have known better.
Yeah, I do love some. If you were talking, 19th century stuff, I love George Eliot, for example. Uh,
March.
yeah, Middlemarch, great book. I would highly recommend that one. I do love a little bit of Dickens. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some just great stuff from that time period too. But yeah, I tend to be a little bit old fashioned in that regard. Uh, but I do read some great
I
modern
love it
short
for
stories.
you. 19th century is not old fashioned. Oh, 200 years ago, that's pretty modern. Maybe
Modern,
1,000 years
at least a
ago.
thousand.
Love that.
Now we're talking. At
Well,
least.
here for fun, because if people have watched us this far, do you want to hear what my recommendations will be? And I kind of want to just get your reactions on
Oh heck
this.
yeah, yeah! If you don't mind telling me, I'm gonna definitely.
I'll 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 spoil my own video happily. All right, give me a second.
Well, you're gonna elaborate in the video, so
Yes, yes. This is a teaser.
exactly.
Uh all right, so this is actually interesting. So the what came up with this is I'm reading Anna Karenina right now by Tolstoy, and
Nice.
the
Yeah.
epicness of this and the multi-perspectival uh and in many ways I think sort of postmodern flavor at points that is happening in Anna Karenina. There's two main characters, but there's perspectives all over the place that sort of tie in this overall thematic point. So I actually have Anna Karenina as a good read if you are a Malazan fan.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. I would throw in maybe Dostoevsky as well. Crime and Punishment, for example.
Yeah, well, so that's gonna come up later.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it will be there. But yeah, Dostoevsky as well. And like definitely Brothers Karamazov
Yeah. Yeah.
is definitely multi-perspectival and much more thematic. But I actually I like Brothers K, but don't love it. So
Okay.
okay, so next one I'd be curious about. So this is Lord of the Rings. If you've read Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
um, I recommend Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck.
Steinbeck. Yeah. Interesting.
So
Huh.
Steinbeck is a very descriptive author, as well as J.R.R. Tolkien. He likes to really set a scene, and at its heart, Grapes of Wrath is a journey story. It's a traveling
Exactly.
story, right? Going from
Yeah.
Dust Bowl to California
Yep.
and the people that change along the way in this little band. And so I think if you like that aspect of Lord of the Rings, I think it's a good one to uh, combination.
Clever. And hopefully they don't run into any volcanoes along the way.
Yeah, I guess you'll just have to read to find out. Uh, Farseer, this is a pretty easy one. So Farseer, Robin Hobb, it's a first-person perspective,
Hmm.
and there's a love of animals and nature, and really emotionally getting caught. So I think Jack London is a pretty easy
Oh yeah.
recommend. My favorite is White Fang, although Call of
Like
the
that.
Wild is also great.
Yeah.
Um, and like if you like Night Eyes, I mean, come on, you got to read some Jack London.
Yeah.
Uh,
Good one.
that's that.
That's my favorite so far. That's my favorite so far. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll go through these a little quicker because I shouldn't do my whole video here. But
Yeah. Don't do the whole.
Dune
This is a teaser. Teaser only. Yeah.
teaser. So Dune is The Color Purple. Again, one of
Oh,
my favorite books of all time.
cool.
Uh,
Okay.
Wheel of Time, Moby Dick.
Oh, wow.
His Dark Materials, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar.
Oh, okay, okay. I think I get that. Okay, yeah.
Harry Potter, Anne of Green Gables.
Aha. That actually makes some sense. Yeah, yeah.
I like that you said that like the other ones don't make sense, but that one makes some sense.
No, I'm
A
looking
Song of
forward
Ice
to
and
your explanations too. And I think I know
A
where
Song
you're
of
going.
Ice and Fire, A Tale of Two Cities,
Oh,
uh,
interesting. Okay. All right.
Live Ship, Live Ship Traders, Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice. Oh, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. There's some pretty key one-to-ones that help there.
yeah.
Stormlight Archive, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift.
Ha, ha. Yeah. Okay.
That one will be history. First Law, the aforementioned Crime and Punishment.
Ah, okay. But that makes a ton of sense too, actually. Yeah, yeah.
And then
A lot of alienation in both of those. Yeah.
yeah, and then this is another pretty easy one. Jade Legacy, The Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I just got Jade, the trilogy, the Greenbone Saga. I just bought it actually, so that's on my
You
to read list.
you will definitely love those. I was blown away by them. I went in
Wow,
with medium expectations, and then really was not prepared for the journey that it would take on. So the
wow,
two most surprising reads I've had since I went on BookTube, as far as like how much I loved them, uh, would I'll put three in this category, but Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty,
I'm hearing good
Jade
things.
Legacy,
Yeah.
the Fonda Lee ones, yep, and then Live Ship Traders trilogy,
Oh
the
yeah,
Robin Hood.
which we talked about. We had a discussion on my channel
Did
with
yes.
Chris and what we had someone else there too, didn't we? We had four people.
I thought it was
Yeah.
just three of us.
No, no, no. We had four people, but who did we have with us?
Oh, this is way too long ago for me to remember.
It's a while back. But huh. Oh, Ridima. It was Ridima.
Real? Oh yeah, we should
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
known that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
miss her on BookTube, but I'm glad she's doing well at school. But I haven't seen a lot of her videos recently.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. Well, we have our lives and all that.
We
Yeah.
do.
Which you know
As
very
someone
well.
who left for 6 months, so yeah.
Yep, yep, you know about that. Well, speaking of which, I've taken a lot of your time, and I know you're a busy guy, and you've got a bookstore to run, a movie theater, a
Yeah, so today is
campaign.
our 1 year bookstore birthday. So we
Oh my
actually do have a
goodness,
big
for Garden Party
we have a big
Books.
yes, for Garden Party Books. We have a big
Wow.
$1 book sale because it's our first year anniversary. So
Oh, wow. Well, happy anniversary. I can't believe it's been a year.
I know time is
Wow.
flying. Yep, we did it.
Wow. That is amazing. Well, congratulations. Then I will be the first to, maybe not the first, but the first on BookTube to congratulate you on that anniversary. That's fantastic.
Perfect. Yeah, and I will say, since we're nearing the end, I will just say, everyone out there, you guys are readers. If you're watching this, especially if you're in the U.S., I don't know if this is international, but buy your books through bookshop.org, not any of those other places. It's so helpful.
Not the big places.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say any names, but it's so helpful. I mean, obviously there's gonna be sales and you're gonna go other places, but if you're just buying a book, you want bookshop.org does an amazing job for independent booksellers.
Mhm.
You can say like your favorite independent bookseller. If you want to put Garden Party Books, that'd be great. But even if you don't do that, any bookstore that is in their network of an independent bookseller that they verify, they send payments to twice a year of 30% of their gross profits, which is just so cool. It helps us out immensely.
Awesome.
So
Yeah.
please support them. Shop.org is a great organization, and you can find basically any book there that you want that you could find on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or those other places.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that resource. That's awesome. I'm sure there are a
Yeah.
lot of people
Yeah.
out there who would really like to support that sort of thing. So, Well, Andy, it's been such a pleasure catching up with you, and I hope everyone watching will go and check out Andy's channel, Andy Smith. Of course, there will be a link in the description. He has some of the really some awesome Malazan content if you somehow don't know about that already. And lots of good stuff on like I said, we talked about Robin Hobb, and you heard about some of the stuff that he's covering now. So lots of great content. And oh, that postmodern Malazan video, everyone who's even remotely interested in Malazan should watch that one. But thank you so much, Andy, for taking the time to chat with me. It's been really cool catching up with one of my oldest friends here on BookTube.
Yeah, no, right back at you. It's kind of funny on BookTube. We kind of have classes without having like graduation dates of like when we first started videos, and so I feel
Yeah,
like me and Alan, I feel like are like a I don't know like a certain class of when we got on BookTube. So it is great catching up, and yeah, I'm glad you're doing well, and thanks for all you do for our community, for Malazan, for BookTube generally. Love watching, and it was a privilege to come on today.
awesome. All right, everyone. Until next time.